Viewers, many thanks for joining us. You're watching OBN Horn of Africa, your favorite media channel. This edition will be discussing about Horn of Africa's political and economic dynamics. And to discuss this matter, I'm joining by Ayana Feyissa, political economy analyst in the Horn of Africa and beyond. Ayana, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me at this.
Well, Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and this geopolitical tension is being aggravated in this part of the world. Why Ethiopia became a landlocked country, and what are the demerits and merits of being a landlocked?
Yeah, so Ethiopia, there's historically Ethiopia has had maritime access and has not always been a landlocked country. But the geopolitical changes that have happened, if we just narrow it down to recent history, around the end of the 20th century, which is around 1991, as Eritrea seceded and had its referendum, Ethiopia became a landlocked country once again. And the government of Ethiopia at the time, which was a very, it's on its inception, came with the parties that were fighting the Derg regime, which also included the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the OLF, and other partners. And they actually allowed the process of secession, the referendum of Eritrea, clearly where it would put Ethiopia in a precarious situation of being fully landlocked, while it had a very broad history and a very broad access to the sea. Not keeping into consideration the situation, the government at the time completely initiated, supported, and confirmed Ethiopia to be landlocked, which was one of the greatest historical mistakes diplomatically for Ethiopia. The government at the time, was willing to do that. But the most interesting stuff there was who were the initial countries who were approving this process of Ethiopia being landlocked, and as Eritrea seceded and had its independence. Somalia, Egypt, and people who led the countries, the states at that time, were signatories and the first ones to actually recognize this process, which left a great country with a long history to be a landlocked country. Of course, our government at the time was also, the initiator and supporter of this predicament for Ethiopia. So that's how we ended up being a landlocked country. It's not like from its genesis, Ethiopia was a landlocked country. It was recent history. As for, it was right around the time where Somaliland became independent, or at least, made their first move in independence from the Greater Somalia. That's around the time where also Ethiopia was led to be a landlocked country.
Well, okay, I like your expression. Ethiopia lost this sea access not from the very genesis of its creation as a nation, but it happened, through course of time. Okay, to change this status quo, Ethiopian government has requested access to the sea and had conducted the MOU with Somaliland, and this has got a big applause by many states and by many nations, except very few actors. How do you see the legitimacy of this quest in the very first place?
This is a very legitimate quest, and the Ethiopian government to this day, to my knowledge, even as some parties were trying to, drum roll into war and conflict. The Ethiopian government still is trying to take the peaceful way out of this situation where certain governments were not happy with the fact that Ethiopian government signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Somaliland government. The Somaliland government and Somalilanders have had everything that a nation could and should have for the last 30 plus years. For the last 21 years at a minimum, they have had, they check all the boxes. They check all the boxes, meaning they have elections that are one of the most democratic elections in the Horn of Africa, in Africa, to be honest. They have a stable democratic system. They have their own
currency, maybe
currency, constitution, passport, whatnot. Everything a nation could and should have, the Somaliland had. And if we're talking about precedents, because some pundits in the media, we see them talking like as if Ethiopia completely created a new precedence. But the reality of it was a lot of nations have already interacted, worked, and signed business deals that include land, shore, and everything in between with the Somaliland government. It is only when Ethiopia did the same that it was considered as a frontation or as a threat to Somalia's sovereignty, right? So for a nation that's concerned about its sovereignty and territorial integrity, it should be showing that concern when Somaliland operated as a nation and dealt with other nations, European nations, with the United Arab Emirates, with everybody else. It has been conducting its business as a nation itself. And, the approval of other nations is not necessary for one people to actually have their own status as a nation. These are formalities. I know there are some rail guards to discourage secessionism and separationism and to maintain the colonial borders as the final territories and boundaries.
Let me pause you here. You've said it's up to Somalilanders to determine their own fate. Why other handful nations, igniting this proxies in line with this MOU? We can mention countries out there.
Yes, so here's the thing. The Somali people, except, the Mogadishu government is a different story. But when we talk about even Somalia, the Somalia people don't want to get into confrontation with Ethiopia because they know Ethiopia is a long-time ally in saving this nation from Al-Shabaab and from piracies. The Ethiopian people definitely don't want any kind of conflict, and their government has shown the same position, even going to multiple dialogues. I've heard Faki, the foreign minister for Somalia, speak yesterday, and it was laughable, the extent that he was proudly mentioning that Ethiopia wants dialogue, but we are the ones that are saying no. Normally in diplomacy, you will not bring about such an argument that says, the other party wants dialogue, we don't want dialogue, and we have preconditions for dialogue. That is not a good position. This shows you that the Mogadishu government is not following through with the interest of its people or its immediate neighbors. They are being used as a proxy by other interests, namely Egypt, right? So we're gonna name it and just call it the way it is, because Egypt has been threatened by Ethiopia's progress, and they don't want not just Ethiopia, but any nation in the Horn, in the North Africa and Horn area, to have dominance or good standing, and they feel threatened. They feel threatened by the fact that the GERD and the Nile River is being used not to their disadvantage, but to the advantage of other people. This is just, this is not something they started now. This has been historically They have used proxies, internal conflicts, conflicts between neighbors, and all of these tools to instigate conflict, instigate tension, so that these nations don't collaborate, they don't have a win-win solution to questions, and they remain muddling in poverty and conflict, while they are the upper hand. They have the upper hand in the region. That is their strategy. And Somalia government just walked into this as they were running around frantically asking everybody, against the interest of the Somali people, trying to sell their maritime resources to Turkey, trying to call the Italians to come and take on their own villas from colonial times, for heaven's sake, trying to call on anybody just so that they don't work with Ethiopia. That has caused them to fall into the hands of Egypt, that had the long run, the Egyptian government that had a long-standing position of making sure Ethiopia or other countries in the Horn do not rise to the level of competitors. So that's what happened.
This MOU, which was signed between Ethiopian government and Somaliland, for other nations, it shows that the flip side of the coin is giving recognition to Somaliland. Would this hold water? I mean,
yeah, any nation has a full right to recognize or not recognize another entity as a nation. Nobody is going to restrict Ethiopia or anyone else to recognize a certain entity as a nation, right? That's just a diplomatic toggle that you keep, and you work through these things rather diplomatically and with interests, and you're not going to just proclaim you have no right. We have the right, and as such we can do it. The Ethiopian government is following a very subtle and more peace-seeking style of more magnanimous style of diplomacy. It could have recognized Somaliland as a nation at any point if it needed. So these are, but following the actions is more important. So as recognizing them as a nation, then we go and make a deal with a nation that we recognize as one, because they have everything that a nation has and they want to be recognized as a nation. Anything that is against that is oppression and colony, right? So you are intruding on the interest of the Somaliland people, Somalilanders, and as a nation, Somaliland. If you deny them their interest and their right, their human right to have their own nation. This is a gathering of people that has land and territory and history, right? So it was a Britain protectorate while the Somalia was being under the colony of Italy. They were under Britain, and the African Union and the international rule is stating that colonial borders should serve as territories. So our boundaries are set by colonial borders, and clearly, colonially, Somalia and Somaliland have two colony structures, and they have a boundary that's set with that. And the people of Somaliland are saying, we're going to follow that rule, and we're going to follow the current stance, and we're going to be an independent nation. So be it. It would be the best thing if Somalia respected that and said, we respect that and we accept you. When we did it with Ethiopia, when the TPLF-led EPRDF did it with Ethiopia, Somalia and Egypt were one of the first nations to actually accept that, because they felt, like it will minimize the opportunity of Ethiopia by landlocking it. Well, they accepted it, but because the government in Ethiopia, accepted that referendum and gave the Eritrean people their rights. The Somali people and Somalilanders should come in agreement and allow these people to have that. Irregardless, Somaliland has been dealing and operating as an independent nation for a long time. And Ethiopia has every right to actually follow through and formally recognize. No one has formally recognized them, but formal recognition is not an action that you can say it might be frowned upon, but you cannot limit a nation from recognize them. It would be nice if the British government, as a former protectorate, stepped in, also recognized. I have seen some moves in the British Parliament. A few parliamentarians actually gathered together and they're trying to recognize Somaliland as a nation. I don't know where that move is in the Parliament in their priorities, but that is a good move. But Ethiopia, as a neighbor, has the right to recognize a nation that has lived like a nation and has the right to conduct business with this nation, and we're not the first one. There has been precedence of business being conducted as an independent nation.
Well, you've mentioned Egypt and Somalia in connection with the ongoing proxies. How about the G7 nations? What is their stand against the MOU deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland? This will help
Yes.
us help us to triangulate the ongoing contention in this part of the world, in the Horn of Africa.
Yeah. So, there was a time where having your cake and eating it too was available. This is not the time. And my view of the G7 nations on how they handled this is they want to have both of the situations, right? So they want to keep their collaboration, quote unquote, with Somalia, and stopping Al-Shabaab from spreading, and they also want to maintain their relationship with Ethiopia in ATMIS and bilaterally, because we have the lion's share in the fact that Al-Shabaab is not a nation governing terrorist organization, right? Like we have the Houthis do in some areas, which is very problematic for these G7 nations, right? So, and we have made sure that Al-Shabaab does not control the Mogadishu government for a long time. And they want to have that. They value that. They also value the relationship with Egypt, which is, stepping in both ways with the Arab League and also being an agent for the G7 nation interest. So they're trying to maintain balance in some way, both by the stick and carrot method, both by applying pressure and also applying reward. But where we are right now, as the Prime Minister of Ethiopia has laid it down clearly in his first introduction of this issue is not something that we are doing because we are bored. This is a serious national interest matter, and it really has great implications on what type of nation we are going to be in the coming 20, 30, 50 years. So we have to have a clear support for the nation that is in the right to ask what they ask and has been seeking peace and has been choosing a win-win approach. And clearly, if they, I know, and I think you have seen something I wrote a small journal that that might be published or not. We'll see. That I wrote on this matter, that the Mogadishu government is showing all the signs of a state that has been compromised, and the government that has been compromised by this terrorist organization that we have been trying to keep at bay and make sure it doesn't spread.
Let me get back to your first notion. The Somalia repeatedly assert that the MOU deal between Somaliland and Ethiopia is a very gross violation. Speaking from the mind of Somalia's politician, could they able to suggest this logical premises to claim such arguments?
No, there is no such argument. This is an exaggeration of interests, right? It is understandable when Somaliland has not gotten a formal recognition, and formal recognition is not something that is contrary to its name. It's not really formal, right? So there is no forms or this and that. A formal recognition is that certain nations support an independent state's formal standing, and then they bring it to the international community and try to introduce it as an independent nation to the United Nations and African Union. That formal recognition does not determine if a state or a nation is a nation or not. And in reality, it's as if they woke up from their sleep, because for the last 30 years, 3 decades is not an incident. 3 decades is not a certain abnormality or a phenomenon. 3 decades is reality. In reality, Somaliland has been a nation. Somaliland, and if you go into the internal issues, like the Mogadishu government has nothing to do with Somaliland. They don't govern anything. They don't even go there. People in Somaliland, most people in Somaliland, I was reading something this week, most people in Somaliland have not been to Mogadishu.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are 2 independent nations. They have operated as such. The only thing that has not happened is that we have not granted Somaliland as the international community the recognition that it so deserves. But we took advantage of the fact that it's independent, as European nations and other nations keep making deal with Somaliland. Nobody is going to Mogadishu to ask for permission when they're renting or when they're taking land, where they're leasing things and where they're working with the Somaliland government. Nobody, bothers to go and ask permission from Mogadishu. That's not how it works. Wow. Because they have no say on them. They don't give them budget. They don't like even have the same government structure and details. So in this situation, when Ethiopia comes and does something, not for the first time or second time, that is common practice with this nation that we have left in limbo between recognition, formal recognition, and federal government. If we know what federalistic government is, Ethiopia is a federalistic nation, right? We have federal states. Our federal states do not operate of their own volition. They actually operate under the auspice, under the unity of the federal government. That's how we had a war in Tigray, because a certain state's leadership decided that it can operate outside of the federal government's interest. And civil war, a very sad thing, but the civil war broke. That's what happens when you have autonomy, when it's one nation. In Somalia's case, that's not the case. Somaliland operates the way it operates. Today, we are in a relationship with Somaliland that is entirely different from Somalia.
I myself been to Somaliland before a couple of months, and I attended this Sovereignty Restoration Day of Somaliland. It's not Independence Day, because before the British, they were independent. So it's restoration of the pre-existed independence of Somaliland. But these Egyptians and Somalia have gone beyond the extent they should go. We are aware of Egyptians act. They have started deploying troops to the border of Somaliland territories.
Yeah, I think Egypt took advantage of the situation in Somalia. People of Somalia do not want Egypt there, period. They do not want a proxy conflict. They don't want to fight with their long-term. We're not just neighbors. We're pretty much family, right? We have a Somali region in Ethiopia. We have been on, even though we had conflicts and this and that in the past, we have history, but we have history together. We share a very broad border, and we are part of their struggle with Al-Shabaab. We have been there. We have, really sacrificed thousands of soldiers to maintain Somalia, to have, for Somalia to have a state. Ethiopia paid a very dear price, both in relationship with ATMIS and other international efforts, and also bilaterally. Ethiopia has paid a great price for Somalia to be where it is today. And it has a long way to go, right? If that process leads to Somaliland and Puntland, Juba, and every entity, every state in Somalia to be united and have a solid federal structure that is governed by the central government, so be it. Ethiopia has never been a blocker, like Hassan Sheikh himself confessed. There was before the January 1st Memorandum of Understanding signature, there was a conversation with people in Somaliland and Ethiopia, and we were really supportive of their effort to unite or bring together. And the Ethiopian government also has mentioned, even other nations, if we can unite under federal auspice, and we can actually be a greater nation and lead towards Pan-Africanism, we have no problem, right? We're not really blinded by this colonial territories. That's not how we operate. But the fact of the matter is, what we have on the ground today is Somalia has a government that is compromised in two ways. One, it has Al-Shabaab people. Literally, the co-founder of Al-Shabaab is a minister in the Mogadishu government today, and sympathizers. The reason why the foreign minister Faki was saying that we didn't ask Ethiopia is asking for dialogue, is not because it makes sense in the international, diplomatic order. Normally, you would be the one who's saying, I am the most peace-seeking one. I'm the one who reached out. I'm the one who's looking for dialogue. But why is Somalia taking the stance where they're saying, I didn't look for conversations. I'm not looking for dialogue? Because they know if they looked for dialogue, Al-Shabaab will use that. I'm not talking about the armed Al-Shabaab, but the one that is infiltrating the government will use it for propaganda tool and say they're working with Ethiopia. And the Hassan Sheikh government, just to avoid ostracization by Al-Shabaab that has infiltrated the Mogadishu government, that it has not reached out for dialogue. That shows you that this government is compromised. The Somali people do not want a compromised government that goes to Italians and invites them to come to their colonial property. The Al-Shabaab government, the Mogadishu government is inviting European colonizers to come back to their villas. They are more concerned about Al-Shabaab doing propaganda that they are with Ethiopia. They are actually looking for anyone at any cost. That's why they said for Turkey to have some say in their boundaries, some say, they actually gave up the future generations of Somalians. Their property, their future has been sold just so that somebody can just look around and have some appearance. Turkey didn't even sign any kind of serious, because Turkey has a good relationship with Ethiopia too. And then with the same effort, they went to Egypt, and Egypt was happy because they were looking for errand boys. They have been for the last, I don't know, for as long as we've been alive. Egypt would hire anyone if it would be against Ethiopia's interests. They are still being investigated in this country that I'm in, the United States, for taking out a $10 million bribe, cash, and bringing it to the Donald Trump government so that it can influence Ethiopia. So
Wow.
if they can take $10 million cash to the US, imagine what they would do to a frantic, unhinged Hassan Sheikh, who's begging the Italians to come and colonize them again. Definitely that he just played into their hand, and they're using it.
Okay, Ayana Feyissa, thank you for your splendid analysis. I really appreciate on behalf of OBN Horn of Africa.
Thanks, Addis.
Appreciate it. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. This brings to the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye.